Hello everyone, I am your host, science fiction author Crystal Storm. Tonight, we take a deep dive into two fantastical topics that in many people's minds hover in the realm of the unbelievable. Crop circles and unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAPs, also known as UFOs. Is there evidence that points to someone or something other than two drunk men with planks leaving us messages in cornfields around the world? Are we truly alone in the universe, or is there a compelling case to be made in support of Earth having been visited by an advanced species? My special guest, Jason Charbonneau, is a filmmaker who has been researching these topics from an intellectual perspective and creates thought-provoking documentaries in effort to increase the public's understanding of the anomalous phenomenon. We'll get his take on crop circles and UAPs. Come on. Let's take a peek inside Crystal's imagination. And here we go. All right, welcome on in, everybody. It is episode 6 of Crystal's Imagination podcast. I am your host, science fiction author Crystal, and I'm super excited about tonight. I'm so excited. You guys have no idea how excited I am to be speaking with a fellow researcher about two topics that I have followed a long time, like a really long time. When you guys don't know this, when I first got into doing like live radio, I was over on Blog Talk Radio back in the day when you could do an hour-long show on Blog Talk Radio for free. And anybody who runs a podcast knows what I'm talking about. Blog Talk Radio got commercialized like so fast. But back in the day, like you could just get on Blog Talk Radio and do a show, and we were talking about Project Blue Book and the Anunnaki and Zachariah Stitchin and all that controversy and crops. And it's so, I mean, I've had so many different guests on the show, so it's really exciting to for the times that we are in right now to kind of circle back around to these topics that never really went away, but it seems, at least from the UAP perspective, and that is unidentified aerial phenomenon, aka UFOs, it's getting a bit more attention. So my special guest tonight is also no stranger to any of these topics. In fact, he's got a phenomenal YouTube channel called Think Anomalous, pretty sure I'm saying that right, where he has brought these topics down to a documentary level. Jason, thank you so much for being on the show and for producing such an amazing YouTube channel for people to begin to explore these topics.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So, Jason, let's dive right into this because I am especially excited to talk about, your thoughts about crop circles and UAPs. But let's get a little bit into your background. You have a filmmaker's background, and it's apparent in the quality of the videos over on your YouTube channel. So, how did you go from filmmaker to, I believe you have a picture of you hugging Travis Walton on your website as well. So, how did those two merge together?
That's a good question. It really, it might seem intentional just with my educational background and whatnot, but I wanted to be a history professor originally, coming out of high school. So I went and did a history degree. I originally wanted to be a history teacher, and then I kind of got sucked into academia. I really liked doing research. I really liked historical research. And so I kind of got roped into doing a graduate. I shouldn't say roped in. I willingly did it, but I did a master's in history, and I was going to go the whole length and do a PhD. But I kind of got disillusioned with academia. I'd always had a kind of hobby of recording music. I'm an amateur musician.
Yeah.
So at the time, I was 22 years old, I guess, or 24 years old. And I thought, well, I don't want to do academia anymore. Where do I go? I guess I'll try to make my hobby my career. So I went and did an audio production degree in Toronto, and that's what brought me to the city, Toronto, Canada. And also then got disillusioned with the audio industry. I was kind of interested in like music recording,
Right.
Realized that was just a terrible industry to get into. And I just so happened to land a job in audio post-production, which is sound effects in film and TV. And I work as a Foley artist now. So that's my day job. But it just so happens that, my background in history, my training in historical research, and my training in audio production just kind of happened to set me up for making historical documentaries, which is what I started doing. I
Right.
actually started the channel as a project during my audio production program. There was a class where we were just supposed to make several iterations of some sort of digital project, and one of the options was to do just a YouTube channel. And so
Hmm.
I started a channel called UFO Case Review. Some of my oldest fans will know that one. Did
Yeah.
maybe 10 iterations of that, 10 videos or something over a couple years. But learned a lot about UFOs just doing that. At the time, I really only believed in UFOs. I wasn't really open to other anomalous phenomena. I didn't believe in ghosts or crop circles or anything like that. But the
Right.
more research I did into UFOs and the more videos I made, the more I realized this is a really complex phenomenon, and if you really want to understand it, you have to know something about other anomalous phenomena. So I had this idea to kind of revamp my channel, or create a new channel just about anomalous phenomena more broadly. And anybody who watches the channel will know I still focus on UFOs. That's still kind of my first love. That's the subject I know most about.
Right.
But I really do believe in drawing connections between different phenomena and understanding UFOs within the context of all anomalous phenomena.
That's fascinating. I'm very excited about that, and I'm very excited how maybe we can connect the dots between some of the other phenomenon that you've researched. But let's kind of start with crop circles, because it's extremely hard to find someone who can speak with. And I know you said you're a researcher, and that's I feel like we all are. I don't think there's anybody who can really call themselves like a crop circle expert, because we just don't know. Um, so where has your research taken you on this phenomenon? Because I find it to be just really, really fascinating how it went from kind of this prank of the guys in the planks, and now all of a sudden we're seeing some really amazing complex symbols, I guess you could call them, all over the world. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Just the way that the phenomenon has evolved, you mean, over time?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, that is very interesting. There's a guy named Terry Wilson, a
Mhm.
researcher who wrote a book called, I believe it's called Old Crop Circles, or The Hidden History. Wish I knew this. The Hidden History of Crop Circles, or something like that. But
Right.
it's the long history of crop circles. And he's shown that crop circles go back, I mean, at least to the early 20th century. There's an
Wow.
old 17th century pamphlet called The Mowing Devil, telling a story of a 17th century farmer who supposedly had his crop chopped down and arranged in a circle overnight. Um,
Wow.
and but since then, there's a few sporadic references to crop circles through the literature. I know there's at least one from a scientific journal in 1880.
Hmm.
There's another journal that mentioned a crop circle in 1937. And that's, I think, when the first picture of a crop circle emerges, although it's a very kind of low resolution picture.
Right.
But then into the 60s and 70s, you actually start getting a lot of pictures of crop circles, a lot of crop circles in Australia, some in Canada here, Manitoba, Canada. And there was I believe it was a government investigation into crop circles in the late 70s.
Wow.
So the phenomenon has definitely been around for a very long time. But those circles, any photo of a crop circle we have before, let's say 1980, shows a very simple circle. One circle, all the crop is kind of laid in a spiral pattern, all in the same direction. There's
Hmm.
no satellite circles or any other element to the formation.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until a couple of English guys, Pat Delgado and Colin Andrews, just two amateur researchers, started researching circles on their own money, on their own time.
Right.
They got involved in, I think, 80 or 81. And at that time, they were starting to see some circles, some multiple circle formations. So, like a central circle with four kind of satellites around, like the five on a dice kind of formations.
Right.
But the more research they did, the more circles they studied, the more circles they documented, they realized that they got more complex.
Hmm.
And in fact, they even suggested, every time they tried to find some pattern to the circles, they said, oh, well, every circle we looked at thus far has been spiraled clockwise.
Hmm.
As soon as they identified that pattern, they would then, usually within a matter of days or weeks, find another circle that broke that pattern. So
Oh,
they
wow.
would find a circle that was spiraled counterclockwise. Anytime they said, oh, okay, well, circles are never bigger than, let's say, 6 meters, well, then they'd find a circle that was 10 meters wide. And they got to the point where they actually felt like they were interacting with an intelligence. They felt like the phenomenon was responding to their investigation, almost trying to prove them wrong, like almost tries to evade their logic or evade their rationale. Every time they thought they figured it out, the
Right.
phenomenon confused them again. And I mean, that's very intriguing. It's
The
that's
role of the
fascinating.
observer.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's something that a lot of anomalous phenomena share, that there always seems to be some sort of interaction with the observer or the investigator. We can maybe get
Hmm.
into that later.
Yeah.
But yeah, so by the late 80s, I think, circles started to get pretty complex, and especially after about 1990, they started getting super complex, and that's when you had Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley, these two old English guys that claimed that they'd made all the circles.
Right.
Um, and after they claimed that, now I have a whole video debunking the Bauer and Chorley story. I encourage
Hmm.
anybody to watch that. I go into
Please do.
considerable detail. And again, that borrows from Terry Wilson's research. He's got a whole website devoted to debunking their story.
Hmm.
I'm convinced that their story is false. They were probably paid by the UK government or MI5 or something
Right.
to concoct that story. It is definitely false. But after that, once that it kind of broke around the world that, oh, the crop circle phenomena has debunked, it's all just a bunch of hoaxers, then it kind of flooded the field with other hoaxers. And the hoaxers since Bauer and Chorley have actually been pretty good, and they've pulled off some pretty impressive circles.
Right.
And I think once those hoaxers got involved and started doing more and more complex circles, the phenomenon again advanced and itself became more and more complex. Until,
Right.
like you said, some of the ones we've seen in the last 10 or 20 years are just outstanding.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the problem is, of course, now with all these hoaxers involved, it just gets very hard to tell which ones are genuine and which ones are not. I mean, we could be pretty sure that anything before 1980, especially I would say before 1978, any photo of a crop circle you see before then is genuine. I mean, there's no evidence that there were any hoaxers going on at that point.
Right.
After 1990, the waters were kind of muddied, and I think that was the intent behind Bauer and Chorley's story.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I can see that. I mean, because you kind of link it to UAPs. I mean, we don't have to get too deep into a conspiracy theory rabbit hole, but you have to think that, I mean, something that is that just magnificent being seen in places all over the world that obviously probably isn't man-made. There's a vested interest in maybe not letting that out until someone in charge feels like it's time for that information to be public. And, whether it's a national security issue or this, that, and the other, we can speculate. But it would make sense that that kind of disinformation would move through it. In your research, have you found kind of, I know you said that it's, especially now, it's really hard to tell between people who are making them versus those that are genuine. Have you found any sort of way that there is a way to depict a real crop circle versus one that some guy made?
Yeah, absolutely. There absolutely is. The genuine circles, first of all, the crop is never actually broken. So when you take a board or an iron bar or whatever Bauer and Chorley claim to have used, you break the crop. I mean, there's no way to just step on a board, not
Right.
crop over, and not break the stalks, especially something as frail as wheat or corn, as they call it in the UK.
Right.
So genuine circles, you actually see that the stalk is bent, and usually right at the base where the stalk is the thickest, right, and most robust. And
Mm-hmm.
especially in crops like rapeseed, which has a very thick and very brittle stalk. If you try to bend rapeseed with your hand, you won't be able to. It'll snap. But
Right.
all these circles, just about every single plant in these circles is bent over to the point where it actually resists being picked up again. If you try to lean over it and pick these plants up again, they'll naturally just swing back down to their laid down position.
Okay.
And you'll see that the entire formation is laid in it looks like it was laid in one continuous motion. So there's kind of a flow to it. So if it's a circle, it's just a continuous flow, and you'll see each individual plant is bent around in a circle to follow the motion of the circle.
Right.
And the plants will actually continue to grow because they're not snapped. They are still growing. They'll continue to grow, not only laid down, but in that curved motion that they were laid.
Oh, wow.
That's number one. Number two, it's just a very neat lay. It's not all kind of crisscrossed and tangled up. There aren't random plants sticking up.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty well flat, very smooth. The other thing that's more interesting is when you look at I believe the scientific term is the pulvini, but they call it the nodes of the plant. So it's like a joint in the stem of a plant.
Okay.
You'll see that those joints are actually blown open.
Oh, wow.
And the theory behind that is there's a research group called BLT Research that suggested that was due to microwave radiation, heating by microwave radiation. they determined that, or they demonstrated rather, that if you actually put a plant inside a microwave it for 30 seconds, the nodes will blow open, like you find in crop circles. What's happening there
That's
basically is that
interesting.
microwaves heat the water in your food, right?
Right.
And those, all plants have a lot of water in them, and there's the most water in those pulvini, in those nodes. So what's happening, or the theory is that those plants are being heated, which makes them more malleable, allows them to be bent over. And the heating is so intense that the water inside the plant turns to vapor, and which of course expands. And the only way for it to escape the plant is to blow the node open and escape that way.
Right.
And there have been a few people that have claimed they've seen a crop circle being made in real time. And just about everyone who says that say they see a lot of steam rising off the formation as it's being made. So that would certainly make sense if these plants were being heated.
Yeah.
And then, more evidence to support the heating hypothesis, you'll see flies actually melted onto plants, onto like weed heads, for example.
Oh my goodness.
You'll see little bits of some charred plants, other things like that. And just generally, yeah, the circle's very neat. Like the kind of wall at which the laid plants meet the standing crop is very neat. It's like a solid wall.
Yeah.
There's usually some sort of central formation, some standing plants in the very center. Like if it's a circle, there'll be a few standing stalks in the center. And sometimes some quite elaborate formations, like plants that have been kind of folded in, and it almost looks like a little, centerpiece on a table or a fountain or something. And there's some really neat designs, if you just Google those images. So yeah, there's all these markers. Also, no lines to the field. Like if you walk through a field, when visitors come visit a crop circle, they have to walk through the field and they trample a bunch of crop on the way there.
Right.
So when you see an aerial shot of a circle that's been visited, you'll see all these trails through the crop. Well, the genuine circle, when it's first found, will have no trails to the crop. There's no evidence that anyone walked there. There'll be no footprints, even in muddy ground. And a lot of crop circles do actually form in stormy conditions, where there's mud on the ground and there's not a single footprint anywhere. So it's not that we can't prove, or at least have some very accurate determination of whether a circle is genuine or not. But with all the circles being made these days, and some people suggest up to 95% of all circles out there now are hoaxed. It's just very hard for researchers to keep up with that. Right. And not every circle can be visited by a proper team of researchers who are going to do, take plant samples and check the nodes of the
due
plants
diligence and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially since it's, mostly amateur researchers that just don't have the funds to be flying around the world and try to get circles, within 24 hours of them being made.
Unfortunately. Hopefully, eventually we'll get there, because I feel like it's a phenomenon that just, like a lot of other anomalous phenomenon, just should have some real scientific attention paid to it. Yeah. Absolutely. We've got a great question from chat. Whatever this phenomenon is, why do you think it talks or communicates in riddles? Why never directly? For example, we can try and interpretate the crop circle, but is that the actual message or a misdirection, like John Keel suggested in his book?
That is a very good question. Thank you, Chad.
Thanks, Max. Great question, Max.
Short answer is I don't have an answer to that, but it is one of the kind of central mysteries of most anomalous phenomena. It's another central mystery of UFOs. I mean, why are all our exchanges with UFOs and aliens so bizarre and often so trivial and strange? And what's been suggested by a ufologist named Jacques Vallée, who I really like, and if you watch a lot of my videos, you'll know that I reference him a lot. But he suggested that the UFO phenomenon is trying to interact with humanity kind of at the level of mythology and culture. So they clearly really have no interest in our politics. They don't try to prevent terrible politicians from taking over. They don't try to stop wars. They don't try to, I know a lot of people think that, UFOs are visiting to try to stop wars or save us from destroying ourselves with nuclear weapons. Doesn't really seem to be the case. I mean, there are plenty of countries around the world, the U.S. in particular, that is arming itself to the teeth, and the UFOs don't seem to be doing anything about that. Right. So I would suggest it's a similar thing for crop circles. There's no direct message that they're trying to send to us. There's nothing that they want us to do in the short term necessarily. Perhaps they just want to, influence our culture, our mythology, or our belief systems in some subtle way that's going to kind of change the outcome of human history in the long term. And I don't know what their ultimate purpose is. Wish I did. That's sort of the $1 million question.
Yeah.
But one thing I could say with all anomalous phenomena I've researched, the kind of outcome is always that they seem to leave the witness bewildered. They seem to leave the witness in a state where their belief systems, their prior belief systems are blown open.
Yeah.
Oftentimes they're physical materialists, or they're atheists, or they're whatever. They didn't believe any of this stuff going in, and they have this experience that absolutely shakes them to their core and really causes a very deep reevaluation of all their kind of fundamental beliefs. So if there's anything that unites all anomalous phenomena, I would say it's that. So yeah.
Yeah. You know what? I always wonder. I really like the gentleman that you referenced, his kind of take on it, and I always wonder as well if it's not just almost some kind of test. I mean, hilariously, when we think back to Star Trek and kind of how they had rules with interacting with a quote unquote lesser species. I mean, I almost wonder if sometimes they're trying to speak in our level, especially with some of the bizarre interactions we've had, and maybe just getting it wrong. Or I mean, with the case of these crop circles, they're like, here's a clue, when you figure it out, we'll call. Right. Like something like that. I don't know, but it's pretty fascinating. And kind of speaking to that about how you argue that maybe they're speaking more along the lines to our maybe mythology and culture. Let's talk about one of the crop circles that I think is one of the most interesting and always kind of blows my mind every time I look at it, why more people don't just say, I mean, if crop circles aren't real, then what the hell is that? Right. And that's the alien face. So I'm going to let you, because you did a lot of research on that, Jason, prior to, I let you know that I kind of really wanted to dive deep into this. So I'm going to let you kind of speak on kind of what happened, and was it an answer from that signal that we sent out into space, and kind of what did your research kind of lead you to believe about this particular crop circle formation?
Yeah, so basically the alien face crop circle, or the Crabwood event, just because it occurred in a place called Crabwood by Winchester in the UK. Mm-hmm. It was formed in 2002. Obviously, people will look up pictures themselves, but it's basically a big kind of gray alien face.
You can't miss it. Like you did crop circle alien, to come right up.
Yeah, and then within that, there's this kind of circle with all like a kind of spiral of little dots. Mm-hmm. And basically, people looked at that circle and kind of realized that it was sort of a spiral from the inside out, and that all those dots could be decoded as binary numbers, right? Ones or zeros. And if you take those binary numbers and translate them through the ASCII system, which is just a way to kind of link up binary sequences with letters and numbers, then it spells out a message. And that message is, let me just bring it up here because I don't want to.
It's a very odd message. Yeah,
that's a weird this message is: beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain, but still time. Then there's some unclear word. Some people think it says believe. And then it says, there is good out there. We oppose deception. Conduit closing. Again, this is a very vague message, doesn't really seem to communicate anything, that we could really act on.
Right.
But again, I would say that is consistent with other anomalous phenomena. Mm-hmm. Anytime, for example, that people get a chance to speak with an alien or something that's abducting them, usually the things that they say are very vague. Almost just seems like something that could have just been dreamt up by, any, 2-bit science fiction author or something,
right?
It's not the kind of thing, we expect these people, these intelligences from higher civilizations or other dimensions or something, to carry this like amazing cosmic wisdom that blows our minds. It never really seems to be that way.
Right.
Now I don't know if that's a point in the circle's favor or not. I don't know if that means it's fake, it was just made by humans, or if it's genuine. And by the way, I want to make it clear that there is a debate over whether this is a genuine formation. Mm-hmm. There's a guy named Paul Vijay who's inspected this formation. He's kind of, he was one of the guys that helped decode this message. His interpretation is that it is a fake crop circle. Mm-hmm. There's another researcher named Lucy Pringle, who's kind of a big leader in the field. She believes it is a genuine one, although she has some doubts about it as well.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know what to make of that message. It could be a message kind of directed towards all the hoaxers out there, towards
Mm-hmm.
the Bauer and Chorleys and all the other hoaxers, and the media institutions and stuff that have declared an end to crop circles, declared that it's all been debunked.
Right.
Uh, it could just be a general message about our politicians or about our leadership, that they're the bearers of false information, and the gifters of broken promises. Um, I don't know. I mean, again, it's such a vague message. You could really almost project any
Any
kind of
kind of meaning.
interpretation
Do
onto
you
that.
think, and curious in your research with those two, the people who, one believes it's false and the other true, but does anyone think that maybe we didn't decode it right? I mean, because I know that we see those, that pattern in the message, and we automatically assumed it to be binary. Is it possible it could have been something else?
Um, sure.
Yeah.
I haven't come across any other interpretation of it.
Okay.
Now, one of the problems with the interpretation, of course, binary you could kind of consider a universal language, but the ASCII code system, which translates binary sequences, two letters and numbers, that is something invented by humans, and
Mm.
there's nothing inherently intuitive about it, right?
Right.
Like when we sent out the Arecibo message into outer space to try to make contact with aliens, we avoided the use of English or any other world language, and we
Right.
tried to communicate in universal symbols that anybody with any culture and language would be able to understand, right? So we
Right.
use just kind of basic number sequences, pictures and pictograms and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, as soon as you kind of draw from a code that was invented by humans, and only I think in the last 50 years or something,
Mm-hmm.
you are kind of putting like your own cultural interpretation on it. And you have
Right.
to ask, well, if there's some other intelligence out there that's trying to communicate with us, would they really use a system that was invented by humans just in the last 50 years? Would they not try to use some more universal system?
Right.
I'm not sure. But yeah, to answer your question, sure, there could be another way to interpret this. Maybe we're completely wrong. But the fact that, you run it through a binary sequence and then translate it to ASCII and it comes up with this perfect message,
Mm-hmm.
with basically no mistakes, I mean, seems like quite a coincidence, right?
Right. 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 That's very very.
Yeah, I think, of course, the other kind of culture-bound thing about that formation is that it,
Mhm.
it depicts what you'd call a gray alien, like one of those,
Yeah.
big-eyed
Mm-hmm.
alien.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's very frequently seen by UFO abductees and UFO
Yes.
experiencers, but that is not the only, quote unquote, alien that has been seen.
Right.
In fact, I would say a lot of the abductions in the last 20 years or so don't see that alien.
Oh, can't wait
And
to
a lot
talk
of
about
cultures
that.
around the world. Yeah, and one thing about the abduction phenomenon is that it seems to be culture bound. It does seem to be related to our cultural assumptions. So I would say this is about the UFO phenomenon more generally, but people tend to see the things that they kind of expect to see,
That's
and
very
those things
interesting.
do change over time. It is very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty fascinating. I'm just and I know we didn't discuss this too much, so I'm just gonna throw it out there, Jason. I remember that there was a crop circle that was apparently an answer to a signal that we sent out into space. Were you familiar with that one at all?
Yeah. Well, it was the Arecibo
That
signal.
was the Arecibo, yeah.
Yeah, it was a response to the Arecibo signal. I don't know about that formation. I don't know if it's legitimate or not.
Right.
So I don't really want to comment on that.
Fair enough.
Uh,
Yeah, definitely.
but
Just
yeah,
another very, very interesting one.
yeah,
Something else for anyone listening to go and definitely check out, because apparently we sent out a signal into space. It just had very basic information about us and our genetic code and that sort of thing. And apparently we got a response back in the form of a crop circle. So another interesting, really interesting one. Jason, before we take a break, and when we come back from break, we're definitely going to dive into UAP and the UAP phenomenon and abductions and maybe kind of linking all these topics together. But what would you say for you is one of the most kind of compelling crop circles or stories about crop circles that that kind of make you a believer in the phenomenon?
yeah. I don't know that it's any particular circle.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is my approach to anomalous phenomena in general. I would say any one thing could be hoaxed. Any one circle could have been hoaxed.
Right.
Any one abduction story or any one UFO story could have been hoaxed. It's more just the totality of the evidence taken together
Mm-hmm.
that is compelling. And to me, it's really I think the biological studies, like the plant studies, those
Mm-hmm.
long nodes.
Yeah.
Once you kind of involve hard science, and you can say, look, this plant was heated from inside. There was steam created inside this plant that blew the node open. How do you do that with a rope and board?
Right.
So I think that's really the evidence that got me. Because when I went into researching crop circles for my video, I didn't really know that much about crop circles. And in fact, going into it, I kind of thought crop circles were not real.
Right.
I kind of thought they were mostly hoaxed.
Right.
But of course, the more reading I did, the more I realized, no, like this is not something that could have been done with rope and board. And so a lot of the biological studies, I would say, got me.
Yeah, definitely.
And I should say the historical ones too, because Bauer and Chorley, those first two hoaxers, they, by their own account, they started making circles in, I think, 1978. And they clearly were not aware of all these photographs and all these descriptions of circles before that.
Right.
So to me, even if you accept the Bauer and Chorley story, okay, these guys made every single crop circle in England from 1978 on. Well, why are there circles in Australia in 1966? Why are there circles in Manitoba, Canada in 1977?
Right.
There has to be something more to the phenomenon.
Absolutely. It is my hope that one day somebody gets a really big fat research grant and can go and start visiting these every 24 hours, kind of the way that the MUFON tries to respond to the alien phenomenon and sightings in that such a way. So maybe one day we'll get some more interesting answers about crop circles. Don't go anywhere, you guys. We're gonna take a quick little 4-minute break. When we come back, we're gonna dive deep into the UAP phenomenon, aka UFOs. Talk about what's going on with UFOs, UAPs today. Some of the most compelling cases, abduction stories. It's not all little green men, you guys. Swear to God. We're gonna talk about that as soon as we come back. Don't go anywhere. You're on Crystal's Imagination Podcast.
When an enemy hires Arden Finch without realizing who or what she is, Arden risks everything to claim her forbidden elemental magic. This hard-boiled private eye will have to save herself before she can save the world, even as the gods and her own community stand against her. Set in a supernatural North Carolina, Elemental is book 1 in a diverse new urban fantasy series. Kirkus Reviews called Elemental a genuine page-turner and gave the sequel, Eldritch Sparks, a starred review. Find Elemental at your favorite bookstore or save 10% when you buy directly from the author with code IMAGINATION10 at whrites.com/shop until July 31st, 2021.
Hey guys, this is Mikey Flash from Speed Force Music. Do you need custom music for your podcast, YouTube show, or any other project? Then look no further than Speed Force Music. We have a library of royalty-free music ready to go in your show right now. Or if you'd prefer, we can also custom craft music directly to your specifications. So for your next project, look no further than Speed Force Music. We are on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/speedforce-music, or you can find us on YouTube under Speed Force Music. Let us custom craft a song directly for you.
Thank you for listening to Crystal's Imagination Podcast. If you want to listen to a podcast similar, let me recommend the Delvin Cox Experience, a podcast in which each week I'm on a one-man mission to unite our culture through diversity. Each episode, I interview a different guest, trying to find out what makes them tick. I've had guests on such as James Gabsey, Crystal Storm, and many others. So after you get through listening to all the Crystals podcasts, check out the Delvin Cox Experience anywhere you get podcasts. Peace.
Hello, Crystal's Imagination fans. Enjoy this sneak peek from the sci-fi novel Sonarchy, the Duology. The images crashed to the surface of Vasco's consciousness and brought with them the vortex of two powerful emotions. They welled up in his chest, slamming into his gut, his groin, a raging heat spreading through his limbs like a wildfire. Something else controlled it. Jealousy, lust. Something else surrounded the light and dark, using them as they were meant to. Vasco's vision narrowed in, showing him the inside of the back of the car. The transition of time revealed itself in clarity. Snow fell around them, lightly coating the private runway. Vasco heard her asking Stefano about his first wife. Then she said something Vasco knew Stefano never expected to hear. Even caught off guard, the response came naturally. Would you want to marry me one day? I already would. Then do it. Marry me. It was the one thing everyone envied yet never truly understood about those two. How they could possibly love one another so much. After a moment of lingering in the aftertaste, Vasco recoiled. Suddenly and violently, he was yanked from that memory and shoved into the next, some unseen force propelling him further into his mind. It grinded to a halt just as the jagged blade sliced open the skin on Stefano's back. Blood oozed from the wound, staining his dirty, sweat-laden flesh. His torturer picked up a bottle cap and shoved it into the open wound, twisting and digging the surprisingly ragged edges into the soft tissue. Vasco realized once more he'd slipped into the role of Stefano Terenzio, and he was both participant and viewer as Stefano's fists clenched and strained against the metal chains that kept him prisoner. Another cut, another shove, and it kept going until his entire back was aflame, his nerve endings writhing in agony as he struggled to bear it in silence. I hope you enjoyed this sneak peek of Synarchy the Duology. Fans of The Godfather and Stargate will enjoy this mobster versus alien sci-fi conspiracy thriller filled with secret societies and the metaphysical wonders that underpin our reality. Get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Scribd, or go right to the author's website, crystalsimagination.com/Synarchy the Duology.
When an
Yeah, and we're back. Welcome back to Crystal's Imagination Podcast. I'm your host, science fiction author Crystal Storm, here with my very, very, very special guest. He knows a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff, and he makes amazing documentaries, so you too can know all about the anomalous phenomenons that are happening right here on good old planet Earth. Jason, again, thank you so much for being on the show. We've just had a great discussion about crop circles. You covered some of the scientific points about how you can distinguish between someone who's making a crop circle versus one that's been genuinely made. So I hope that's information that people can take with them and kind of do their own research. So now let's dive into what's near and dear to your heart and what you started making documentaries about, UFOs. How did you get into that? I mean, when you were doing this project for school, why UFOs?
Well, I guess my interest in anomalous phenomena started when I was maybe in grade 6 or 7 or something. I just pulled some book off the shelf in the school library, and it was just one of those books like talking about the Yeti, talking about the Loch Ness, all that, and I was just like fascinated. Absolutely blew my mind. So I think that kind of planted a seed. I had another similar experience in high school, and that's when I learned about the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter of 1955, which is still my favorite UFO encounter.
Mm-hmm.
But I think
very briefly give like a quick sentence summary about that one, because there might be some people who are listening who have no idea what we're talking about.
Basically, it's it happened in Kentucky. It was a whole family. I think there was 11 people in this little primitive farmhouse. And one guy sees a UFO kind of fly overhead and thought he saw it land behind some trees. And then about an hour later, you get these little like goblin creatures with like big ears, and they're sort of metallic looking. They're glowing. They kind of look like they're hovering off the ground. They moved in a really weird way. And the people in the house were so freaked out, they pulled out shotguns. They were shooting these things. They said they heard like a metallic sound when it hit them, but they couldn't seem to kill them. And none of these creatures ever attacked or hurt anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But they kept trying to approach the house and get blown back every time they were shot. And this, I think it went on for, I can't remember, maybe a couple hours. And then about by daybreak, it just stopped. And they never saw these things again. So kind of fascinating.
Imagine what would have happened if they had just invited them in.
I know.
Yeah. You'd have said hi instead of don't move, I'll blow your head off. Although I get it. If an alien looks like a cockroach, I'm probably not going to say hi either. Yeah, definitely. But yeah, please continue.
I think I was about 22, and I don't know why, but I just decided, I've been vaguely interested in UFOs all my life, But, I've always been told by, debunkers like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Carl Sagan or these people, I've always been told that, oh, there's nothing to it. It's a bunch of nonsense. But that just didn't seem to make sense, just given all the stories that you hear over time, the fact that these stories keep coming. They've been coming for, at the time I thought 50 or 60 years. There's police officers and military people and jet, pilots. And it just didn't seem to make sense that it could all be nothing. And yet there's just this mountain of evidence. So I kind of took it upon myself to do a little bit of research. I started with just, basic Wikipedia kind of online research and watched a lot of documentaries and stuff. And I think within maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I was like, okay, there's something going on here. Like, there's no way this is nothing. Right. And then I got into reading some books. I started with Edward Ruppelt's report on UFOs. He was actually the director of Project Blue Book, which was the U.S. government UFO research group for 22 years. And then I was just hooked. I mean, once I was confident enough to declare, yes, these things are real, there is definitely a UFO phenomenon, I was just hooked. And I was just one of these guys that just couldn't put the subject down. So I just kept reading books. So by the time I went to school and had to do this project, I thought, well, I'll follow up on that interest.
Yeah, and we're glad you did. Everyone, make sure that you are following the Think Anomalous YouTube channel for some great documentary-style videos about this phenomenon. So, Jason, let's talk a little bit about, the subject about UFOs has been going on for so long. Like, I don't think people realize just how, Betty and Barney, and everybody's heard of those famous Travis Walton. Very few people I think have heard about the Battle of Los Angeles. They think it's that movie, but no, there actually really was. And now all of a sudden, 60 Minutes is doing documentaries on UFOs. There's apparently a government report coming out, and you and I were talking a little bit about this on break. So, what's kind of your thought on kind of the UAP phenomenon and where it is right now?
Well, so for the longest time, up until about 5 or 6 years ago, let's start with Project Blue Book. So
sure.
The U.S. government made created this group to investigate UFOs. Went through a couple different names, but it was eventually called Project Blue Book. And it was started in 1947 and ended in 1969. Now, for most of its existence, I do think there were a few years where the U.S. government was genuinely trying to determine what UFOs were. I mean, you got to remember, in 1947, it was the Cold War. They thought that these things were Soviet craft, and I think that's the only reason that the U.S. government got involved in investigating these things. I think if they'd suspected right off the bat that, they're probably extraterrestrials or probably something extra-dimensional, I don't think they ever would have got involved because it really has nothing to do with the military.
Right.
But specifically, the U.S. Air Force got involved because they thought that they were enemy spy planes or something, right? Enemy weapons of some sort. So they started Project Blue Book, and I think pretty soon realized, okay, these probably are not Soviet craft. I mean, the maneuvers that they're pulling off, the things that they're doing, probably could not be done, at that time. I mean, could hardly be done now. Certainly wouldn't have been possible in 1947. So I think they quickly realized, okay, we got in over our heads here. We thought that this was going to turn out to be Soviet spycraft. It looks like it's maybe aliens or something. But how do we tell the public that? How do we tell the public, oh yeah, there's all these things buzzing around sensitive airspace. They fly over our airports. They totally ignore our rules, and yet we don't even really know what they are, and we have no way of controlling them.
Right.
The U.S. military cannot send that message to the people. Basically, say, hey, we're not in control of our own skies.
Right.
So they just tried to kind of bury the phenomenon. They tried really hard to debunk every sighting. They would, appoint directors to the project that, didn't believe in UFOs and had no interest in furthering investigation. And so they just dragged this out for a couple of decades and really tried very hard to debunk sightings. And they got a guy, their scientific consultant, J. Allen Hynek, who was a legitimate astronomer and a good researcher, and went on to become a UFO researcher and a quote-unquote believer. But at the time, they hired him really to debunk sightings, and he kind of understood that's what his role was. Anyway, by about 1969, I think the U.S. government basically just got sick of doing this. They knew it was the Project Blue Book at that time was basically just a public relations effort. They didn't want to be involved in UFOs anymore. They hated, trying to debunk these things and constantly there were constantly people calling them and reporting sightings, and they just didn't want to have anything to do with them.
Right.
So they set up this project with the University of Colorado Boulder called the Condon Report, and it was a 2-year study. They got this guy, Edward U. Condon, who was a kind of a nuclear physicist, I believe, famous scientist in the United States. They got him to lead this project, specifically because he also didn't believe in UFOs, and in fact was very dismissive of the UFO phenomenon and ufologists and UFO believers. And they did this study, which was, again, was kind of a sham, very bad report, very unscientific report. And even though the report found that 30% of the sightings that they examined could not be explained, Edward Condon wrote this ridiculous conclusion in which he claimed, well, there's nothing really of interest here. He claimed two things specifically. He said, we should not study UFOs with the expectation that science will be advanced thereby. And second, UFOs pose no threat to national security. He didn't say UFOs weren't real. He didn't say they didn't exist. He said, there's no point in studying them. They're not going to benefit science. They're not going to benefit the military. So once that report came out, those conclusions were issued, they closed Project Blue Book. They said, there you go. That's our justification. We don't have to do this anymore. There's no point. And again, I want to reiterate, they didn't say the UFOs didn't exist. And they actually directed people. They said, look, if you want to report UFOs, report it to MUFON or some independent group. Right. Don't report it.
Right.
That's how things stood for, I guess, about 50 years.
I feel like there's just no logic in either of those two sentences. But okay, go off.
Yeah, no. Certainly not the first one, maybe the second one, but
yeah.
So for years, if you talk to debunkers or if you talk to military representatives, they would refer you back to the Condon report. They would say, look, we studied this. The Condon report proved that there's nothing really to this. There's no point in studying this. Well, so what's really interesting is when things started to change in about 2017, they kind of came out with the exact opposite message, specifically on the national security issue. So the story kind of starts really briefly with Tom DeLonge of Blink-182.
Hilarious.
This guy who was, famously interested in UFOs, sang about it in some of his songs, publicly expressed his interest. And basically, as the story goes, and I encourage everybody to read an article by a guy named Robbie Martin on the Mysterious Universe website called The DeLonge Delusion. And he goes into the history of Tom DeLonge's involvement with UFOs. And basically shows that Tom basically made some calls to, I can't remember who exactly within the U.S. military or within the government. He had this idea of making these documentaries and other kind of film projects, kind of talking about secret government weapons. And he wanted to kind of, tie it into UFOs and stuff. And he wanted to collaborate with the U.S. government to get U.S. government money, I think, to help fund this stuff.
Right.
They said, oh, well, we're not really interested, but why don't you attend this this employee event for Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, which is a weapons manufacturer in the United States. Tom goes to this party and meets some important people who he didn't name, and pitched his idea again, and then these people seemed interested. So Tom goes through this whole saga where he gets kind of linked up with other people within the kind of military industrial complex within the U.S. defense establishment. Right. And again, these are all secret meetings, they're all classified. He's not allowed to say who he met. But he was definitely talking to real generals and other figures within the intelligence community and things. And they kind of sanctioned this project. And Tom started hyping this on social media for years. And finally, in about 2017, I think it was about the fall of 2017, he announced he's making this group called To the Stars Academy. And won't get into it in too much depth, but basically, it was kind of this joint project where he was going to write fiction books and movies and stuff about UFOs and secret government technologies. And at the same time, he was starting this aerospace company who was bringing these researchers in who were supposedly going to research anti-gravity technology and all this stuff. A bit of a scam, in my opinion. I think he was just trying to make money. But it did coincide with this kind of government disclosure where the New York Times did this report on this group that supposedly existed within the U.S. government called the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program, or ATIP, AATIP. And the head of that supposed project was a guy named Luis Elizondo. And he came forward. He was on Tom's team of To the Stars Academy. And he claimed that, yes, there was this group called the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program. It ran from about 2007 to about 2012. And then it kind of ran out of funding and more or less stopped. But as the story goes, they were investigating UFOs specifically to try to determine whether they were threats to the United States or not. Mm-hmm. And their conclusions were basically, yes, these things are a threat to the United States. Mostly in the sense that they violate sensitive airspace and things like that. And, so the story was, we were frustrated by this lack of funding. The government isn't taking this seriously. We're trying to take UFOs seriously, so we need more money. We need to, kind of start this project up again. And so, Tom kind of faded into the background. He had a kind of a disastrous interview on Joe Rogan where he just came across as really not credible. Yeah. And he was actually replaced in To the Stars Academy by Luis Elizondo. And now Luis Elizondo is there's this reality show basically called Unidentified, I think on the History Channel.
Yeah, he's one of the big faces in the movement right now. Everybody's quoting him. He's on everybody's shows. Yeah. UFOs, Twitter's blowing up about it. Yeah.
He's now kind of the face of the quote unquote disclosure movement. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where things stand now. There's been some more developments in the last couple of years, but it's basically Luis Elizondo and talking about this threat narrative.
Yeah.
And so that's also when UFOs kind of got rebranded as UAPs. And the term UAP actually comes from a British study from 1997, I think, called the Condine Report. Not the Condon Report, very confusing. But and they had basically invented this term purely to try to throw UFO people off their trail. They didn't really want people looking up this report, so they figured, well, if we call them UAPs instead of UFOs, you won't be able to search it on the internet because no one's going to find it, right? But anyway, Luis Elizondo and the ATIP program adopted this new terminology, again, I guess just to kind of break from the past of UFOs. But they also started throwing around this term advanced aerial threats, which again, assumes that it's a threat.
Yeah.
And this is kind of my problem with this whole narrative, because again, if you go back to the Condon Report, their whole conclusion was these things are not a threat to national security.
Right.
And I would agree with that. They definitely violate sensitive airspace. Mm-hmm. There's definitely been some events. There was an event in 1967 where a UFO was seen to disable some weapons, some warheads.
Yeah, that's a very fascinating video. People should watch that and research that. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. But in general, these things don't attack people. They don't attack fighters. They don't fire any projectiles. Anytime that anyone's tried to engage, I know there was a UFO chase over Tehran in Iran in 1976. And the pilot tried to fire missiles at this UFO, and for some reason his weapon system was disabled immediately before firing. Mm-hmm. So these things don't seem to want to fight with people. Clearly their mission is not to destroy military bases or destroy fighters, because they have never really done it. So the whole idea that UFOs are a threat to national security, I think it's quite a stretch.
Yeah.
Definitely, the U.S. government is not in control of them. They certainly, they do what they want, and they don't listen to our rules. But calling them a threat,
God forbid that. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, it completely contradicts the conclusions of the Condon Report, which we were told for 50 years was the final word on UFOs. Right? That's the very reason that we stopped investigating UFOs.
I can almost see why the Condon Report would say, that they're not a threat to national security, because, considering the time, you didn't want to have anybody up in arms about it, right? They figured like there was high paranoia. And now with the way kind of, at least down here in America, how mindset and culture is, I can understand phrasing it the way that they phrase it, because in a sense, the UFO, I'm going to agree with you, Jason, that, if they were going to do something at this point, they would have done it. And so, no, they're not a threat. But if it's something that you can't match with our military, has the capacity, like you said, to just disarm your system, shut down your nukes, then yeah, sure, it's a quote-unquote threat in that manner. But in the same time...
Threat, maybe.
Right, yeah. But, I don't think they're here for any aggressive purpose. Quick question from chat. Do you expect anything from this supposed report that's supposed to come out from the Pentagon to deliver to Congress? Yeah.
Not really. There's already, the New York Times just in the last week or so put out this an article on what we're supposed to expect from this report. So someone from this report, someone has knowledge of this report, leaked some information to the New York Times. Mm-hmm. And what the New York Times said was, well, basically the report's going to conclude that there's no direct evidence that these things are extraterrestrials.
Of course.
Which, again, I would agree with. I don't think there really is any direct evidence. There's kind of circumstantial evidence. They certainly could be extraterrestrials, but I wouldn't jump to that conclusion. And basically it says, well, don't expect much else from this report beyond that.
Right.
So no, I'm not expecting any big bomb to be dropped. But what I think it is going to do, and what I think all of this kind of recent disclosure stuff is doing, is, again, trying to hype these things up as threats and trying to really stress how behind the U.S. military is compared to these UAPs. And that's what you find throughout all this disclosure stuff. That's what Luis Elizondo keeps saying. Marco Rubio, senator, is another guy who's really interested in, and he keeps saying, oh, well, these things dance circles around our fighter jets. Like, we're so far behind,
Yeah, let's
and
dump another $5 billion into the military-industrial complex,
exactly.
right?
What
Yeah.
if these things are Chinese? What if these things are Russian? Like, they're
Right.
dancing
They're
circles around.
not, guys. They're not.
Yeah. So they're trying to basically say, and there's this big focus now on hypersonic technologies. They say, well, these things seem to be able to achieve hypersonic speed, so that's something we need to do. If these things can do it, we got to do it too.
Right.
And so basically, my interpretation of this thing is basically that it's just sort of a ploy. It's a PR stunt, basically, to try to get young people specifically interested in secret government technologies, interested in the military, and really to try to kind of manufacture consent for pouring more money into the military-industrial complex, and specifically pouring more money into the U.S. Space Force, which of course Trump just created. Now it's kind of a big goal of the U.S. government or the U.S. military to weaponize space and achieve dominance in space. And I think UAPs is kind of their way of doing that, right? They say, well, there's this
what
threat.
a disservice to this phenomenon. This is why these and I know you won't, Jason, and that's fine. I'm gonna go so far as to say they're extraterrestrial, and this is why they won't fucking talk to us. This shit right here. This is why they come down, they fly around, they observe us, and then they fucking leave. This is why.
Yeah. You guys care about his weapons.
Yeah.
I want to. As we said on the break, I don't want to sound like too much of a downer on this. I mean, I appreciate that the New York Times is talking about UFOs now. I appreciate that people in positions of power are now encouraging people. No, you got to take this seriously. This is real. I think that's a step forward, and that's great. But I don't see a really good representation of the UFO data there. I mean, again, as I've kind of alluded to several times in this interview, there's all these kind of anomalous connections to other phenomena. UFO events are often seen in conjunction with not only crop circles, but apparitional experiences, all these other anomalous phenomena. They all seem to be tied together in some way. There's a lot of weirdness, what J. Allen Hynek called high strangeness to UFO sightings. I myself had a UFO.
Yeah, you know what? Let's talk a little bit about that, because and if you don't mind going a little bit over time, I definitely want to respect your time, because I mean when we talk about, quote unquote, national security, everybody, talks about abductions, and everybody's like horrible abduction experiences with aliens. But I know some people have not had horrible experiences. They've just had really weird ones. So, right. I mean, can you talk a little bit about, kind of your research into that, and then maybe a little bit more into some of, like you said, the anomalies that surround, when people see a UFO, that's not all they see. Something else is also happening.
Right. Well, I guess maybe the first thing to say is, as I kind of alluded to earlier, the things that we see in the sky seem to have some relation to our own technologies. So if you go back to some of my videos, I just recently did a video on medieval flying ships. So there were these, what I would call UFO sightings in the Middle Ages of like literal ships flying in the sky, like wooden ships with sails and things. And there's these stories. We're not really sure how accurate they are, because they're probably embellished over time. But there's these stories of a ship flying over. It's attributed to several different places in Ireland and the UK, but somewhere in Ireland probably. And the ship dropped an anchor to the ground, and then the people on the ground saw this anchor, looked up this rope, and saw the ship floating in the sky. And then this human-looking sailor, jumped off the ship and swam down through the air as if he was swimming through water to try to retrieve this anchor. Then in the late 19th century, in 1896 and 1897, there was a wave of what they've called mystery airships over the United States. I also did a video on that. I encourage you guys to look that up. And what people saw were, distinctly 19th century technologies. They saw things with flapping wings, which we know, you can't make a machine fly with flapping wings. That's impossible, as we understand it. They saw like Zeppelin-like things, just a whole bunch of bizarre contraptions, things with like downward-facing propellers, and all these mechanisms for generating flight that have since been disproven. And you got to remember, in 1896, 1897, the Wright brothers hadn't flown the airplane yet. Right. People were actively working. People were very, very, very interested in flight technology at that time. It had just kind of reached a point where people finally believed that flight was possible, but no one had built a heavier than air flying machine at that point.
Right.
And certainly nothing that, achieved the maneuvers that people were seeing. And yet there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of newspaper articles of people claiming to see these things all over the United States, from California down to Louisiana. And so again, they're UFOs in every sense of the term. They're unidentified flying objects or unidentified aerial phenomena.
Right.
But they're not the spinning discs that we see today.
They're matching the technology of the time that they're being seen.
Exactly.
Let's speculate. Do you think that's on purpose? Almost like don't show them something that's gonna blow their mind any harder than what I mean. Because you imagine being in the Middle Ages and you see a fly. How would you even talk about it? Like, what would you
Right.
even say? Would they even have the words to describe something like that?
Yeah, I mean that's one interpretation of the data, that they're somehow, that they are, an extraterrestrial civilization, that they're visiting us, and they're showing up in technologies that wouldn't freak us out, like you said. But again, some of these, especially those 19th century. Well, first of all, the flying ships in the Middle Ages. I mean, you can't fly a ship in the sky. I mean,
Right.
I think it goes without saying that
Yeah.
that's impossible, right?
Right. Can't do it.
And again, a big machine with flapping wings couldn't fly either, or little downward facing propellers. I mean,
Fair
the
enough.
things
Yeah.
that they were flying were not the things that we successfully flew, 10 or 20 years later.
Right.
So I think it's highly improbable that these things actually, could have worked.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. My theory, and this is sort of the theory of Jacques Vallée and John Keel,
Mm-hmm.
is that it is something, maybe aliens, maybe something extra dimensional. I don't know. But they have some way of interacting with our consciousness where they can actually make us see what we expect to see.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, like you said, a way not to
I
freak
like
us out.
that. Yeah, I like that idea. Yeah.
And again, if you assume that they're trying to influence our culture or our mythology,
Mm-hmm.
they just want to kind of subtly slip in, again, not blow our minds too much. So they show up in a way that makes sense to us. And that's why, in the last 50, 60 years, they've disguised themselves as aliens because we believe in aliens. That's something that fits into our worldview. Even if you're a materialist or, an atheist, you don't believe in any anomalous phenomena, you'll believe that aliens are real because that's evolution, that's science, and, interplanetary space travel is possible, all that stuff. So yeah, kind of got off track there, I
No,
guess.
that was a great tangent, and it really it's good food for thought. Good food as to why,
Right.
why we're seeing. We're having all these sightings, that far back, but the sightings subtly changed. I guess depended on who is looking at them. And let's talk a little bit about abductions. I mean, you said yourself that you had that in Kentucky where they look like goblins in some high tech armor.
Right.
They're not all just green aliens. What are some other strange abduction stories that you have heard?
Oh, just in terms of the forms of the aliens?
Yeah, sure. Let's start there.
Well, I mean, the first point to make there is that, like, almost as many things as you could imagine have been seen.
Interesting.
I think, a lot of people, especially people that, want these things to be aliens or want them to be extraterrestrials, they tend to kind of seek out the data that fits that model.
Right.
And, once the kind of gray-eyed, or the gray alien kind of got established in the late 80s, and, the spinning disc kind of got established in the 50s, they only kind of wanted to seek out cases that matched with that.
Right.
So if someone reported something other than a silver disc, they said, oh, well, that's probably not a real sighting. Or if somebody reported, a human being or something that looked like a human being stepping off a UFO, they would say, oh, well, that couldn't have been real. But really, if you look at the data in its totality, there's tons of different things being seen. I mean, in 1896 and 1897, all these things were piloted by things that looked like humans.
Interesting.
A lot of people, that there's one kind of archetype of alien that people call the Nordic type, which is just like a tall, like kind of Nordic Caucasian, with blonde hair and stuff. There's there was the Zemfreda case, which I did a video on. Italian guy in the late 70s who got abducted and said that there were these like 3-meter tall big green aliens with gills on them and things.
That's amazing. Okay.
Yeah, very, very scary. I mean, there's just a huge variety of things seen. So again, to me, that's another reason to suspect, well, maybe they're not extraterrestrials, because if they are, then you have to assume that there's like hundreds of different civilizations visiting us at the same time, which is possible, of course. I mean, if you assume that the universe is full of life, that's possible.
Okay.
But sometimes people see just, a creature that's just a ball of light, or a silhouette, or like a shadow person. There's been at least a few cases where people said, people were skeptical of what they were seeing, and they told their abductors, they said, show me what you really are. And these things, what was originally a gray would just change form right before their eyes.
Yeah.
And turn into a human or like a reptilian or something else. So I tend to think that, the forms that we see and the ships that we see are not necessarily what they truly are in a physical sense. That it's some sort of projection or some sort of illusion, or it's them getting inside our consciousness and making us see that, but it's not their true form. For one, I tend to believe that these things are, I mean, I don't know what, but extra dimensional rather, or some sort of spiritual phenomenon, that they're not necessarily, jumping in a little ship and flying over here from another planet, but they're somehow entering our reality or manifesting in our reality and taking on some physical form that kind of makes sense to us, or that will kind of achieve the effect that they want to achieve, and freaking us out or having us believe something.
That's fascinating. That's really, really fascinating. In the last little bit of time we have, Jason, talk a little bit about how you have seen kind of all these anomalous phenomenon linked together. What has been kind of any kind of strange kind of connections, or maybe just talk a little bit about how, like you said, if you see a crop circle, you'll probably see a UFO, and then maybe you'll see a ghost. Just talk a little bit about that.
So for one, this was something that a guy named Whitley Strieber mentioned. He was an abductee himself in the late 80s, and he actually popularized the image of the gray alien on the cover of his book Communion in 1986 or 87. And he kind of went on and did a bunch of study of his own. He talked to a lot of abductees and got a lot of letters from abductees. And what a lot of them said was that they saw apparitions of people, usually dead relatives or something, either right before a UFO sighting or right after a UFO sighting. Sometimes people that are abducted and are on these ships see something other than aliens. Again, they might see dead relatives, or they might see other humans on this ship. They might see other little creatures, like Whitley Strieber saw these little dwarf creatures, these little all black kind of dwarf things in these hoods. He saw a whole variety of things. As I kind of alluded to earlier, I had my own UFO sighting in 2013.
Yes, please tell us.
3 weeks before that, I had a dream that I had a UFO sighting. Wow. So I had a dream. I live here in Toronto. My parents have a farm a few hours outside of Toronto. And while I was sleeping here in Toronto, I had this dream that I was on my parents' farm and saw this UFO. Well, 3 weeks later, I'm on my parents' farm with a friend of mine, and we both, sure enough, saw a UFO. The sighting wasn't exactly like my dream. It was just sort of a point of light that danced around in the sky and then kind of reappeared on the horizon and started changing colors and then just vanished before our eyes. The interesting thing about that, not only did I kind of have a premonition of that through a dream, but that night, my friend who lives in Ottawa, which was like a 7-hour drive away, that very night, this semicircle appeared on the side of his house. His wife called him the next day to tell him, sent him pictures and stuff, and it turns out there was a perfect semicircle actually burnt into the siding of his house, like singed.
What?
They tried scrubbing it off. They thought it was painted on or something at first. They couldn't scrub it off. And that apparently appeared the night of our UFO sighting, despite the fact that we were 7 hours away. So to me, that kind of suggests
Weird.
Right? It kind of suggests that there was some interaction with him on a conscious level. It's not that, we just happened to be in the right place at the right time and just saw this UFO wandering through. Mm-hmm. It wanted us to know, no, I know who you guys are. It told me in advance, 3 weeks in advance, that it was going to appear to me. Mm-hmm. And it wanted it to know that it knew who he was too and knew where he lived. So it marked his house just to say, look, you didn't just happen to stumble upon me. I know you. I appeared to you for a reason.
Mm-hmm. And I'm Alien was here.
Yeah.
Or something. Yeah. Wow.
Those things are kind of hard to account for with just your standard kind of extraterrestrial kind of, exploring Earth. Like one of the big theories in the 50s and 60s was, well, they're just doing a geological survey. They're just here to, take some rock samples and study humanity. Well, why would there be these kind of psychic connections in that case,
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
there's a lot of quote unquote woo around the phenomenon. So, I mean, if anything comes from, UFOs kind of quote unquote moving mainstream. I don't know how far mainstream they'll go, but at least maybe get out of conspiracy theory circles and people not taking them seriously. I hope there becomes a wider kind of scientific study that kind of takes everything into account. Like you said, people will just say, well, I'm only interested in green aliens, but aren't doing what you're doing, which I think is phenomenal, and other researchers are doing, and just looking at the whole of the phenomenon and saying, is this a dimensional thing? Is it aliens and a dimensional thing? Which of these sightings could we attribute to maybe someone visiting us versus somebody came in through a dimension versus is this some kind of paranormal phenomenon? Like, what are we seeing here and what ties it all together? I'd love for something serious to be done about that really kind of gives it the kind of attention that it deserves, especially if we're going to start treating these things as a quote-unquote threat. Then let's do this correctly, not just from a military standpoint.
Right, exactly.
That's just my 2 cents. Anyway, Jason, you've been a phenomenal guest. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'd love to have you back sometime as well to talk about some of the different phenomenon that you discuss on your YouTube channel, because we could talk for a whole other hour, I think, about shadow people
we just scratched the surface, really.
Oh, we didn't even really dive deep here. This was like a beginner's course for this topic. I mean, just abductions alone, there are so many stories, and you've researched some of them. So guys, he can totally play tabletop with this bander. Everyone, please make sure that you visit Jason's YouTube channel. It is Think Anomalous. I can't say that word. Say the word for me, Jason. I swear to God.
Anomalous.
Thank you. Please go to his YouTube channel. There's just, oh my goodness, the Science of Reincarnation, the Ark of the Covenant, the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter. Well, that's the one with the goblins. He's just got the aerial school UFO landing in Zimbabwe. I'm just reading you some of the videos that he's got there. They're wonderfully done. They're documentary style. Great information in them. Jason is a phenomenal researcher, so please go and check out his channel. Jason, I know you're not just on YouTube anymore, you're branching out, so please pimp the hell out of yourself and tell everybody where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, I mean, we're just kind of in the process of getting videos uploaded to other things, but you can find us on Odyssey, which is actually kind of a clone of YouTube. I think it's all the same videos, but a better search engine. On Rumble, on BitChute. Basically, just look for us anywhere you are, because we're constantly trying to upload to new platforms. So if there's another platform that you use, you don't like YouTube, please give us a search there as well. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. Please follow us there. But you'll always be able to find us on YouTube as well.
Definitely. So keep asking questions, you guys. Take the phenomenon seriously. And so if little green men or little goblins show up outside your house, say hi before you shoot them, please, so we can get some research.
Ask them where they came from. Try to get to the bottom of it.
Yes, please. And then call MUFON. Call them. Or something. All right. You are listening to Crystal's Imagination Talk Show. I am your host, Crystal. I'm a science fiction author, and I put all these topics in my books, which is why I talk about them. Please come back next week. It's going to be a pre-recorded show, but that's only because my guest lives in Australia, and we're not going to do this live at 7 a.m. So that's why it's a pre-recorded show, but we'll be talking about the paranormal. Gary Anderson is a ghost hunter, so I will be terrified the entire show, because I do aliens, but I don't do ghosts. That's my line. That's I don't talk to ghosts. I don't want to know nothing about no ghosts. I don't want to see ghosts. If an alien shows up, we can talk. If a ghost shows up, it's got to get the fuck out. So we're going to talk to him all about the paranormal and his ghost hunting, and some tips and tricks if you want to get into it, and how to take that topic seriously as well, and not just, download the EVP app on your phone and think that you're going to whatever. I'm not even going to talk about it. Anyway, that is next Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, we're going to talk to a gentleman named Christopher. He is a witch, and he's going to give us a deep dive into all about the craft. And, if you want to jump into yourself and beginner's tips, and he's written books about witchcraft that I feel like should be taught in school, because they're just so good, and about magic and all. He's got a very practical way about him, and to how he approaches witchcraft, and it's just wonderful. So those are my last two guests for the month of July. Stick around, we've got a whole nother wealth of topics that we're going to be covering in August. We'll have Jason back, probably, if not in August, and definitely in October or September, and we'll talk about that and reincarnation, and there's all kinds of stuff that we want to talk about here on Chris's Imagination. So stick with us. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that like button. If you are listening to us on a podcast episode of your network of your choice, you know what to do. Subscribe, reviews, comments, all that shit. Buy my books, the Synarchy series, crystalsimagination.com, and I will talk to you all next Tuesday. My Twitch family, stick around. I'll be back in like 10 minutes. We're gonna do some gaming. We'll be back. Well, hey, Crystal here. I wanted to thank you personally for joining us for this episode of Crystal's Imagination, the talk show. I hope you'll take a quick second to drop us a like, subscribe, leave a comment, and or a review. I would love to hear your feedback. If you have a guest suggestion, drop me a line at talkshow@crystalsimagination.com, or you can just send me a note and we can be email buddies. Want more podcasts? You can also check out the serialized fiction podcast of the same name, Crystal's Imagination. You'll find it on my YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Check out all the information down in the description. Till next time.